explore great equipment from the past and present. And of course, we all strive to add realism and detail to our layouts. So we'll share some secrets and techniques that will help you make your operation look more authentic. And when you see this graphic, pay attention, because it tells you the name of a computer file stored on this DVD, including additional details and techniques for creating and improving your layout. Let's get rolling as we bring the action, power, and creativity of model railroading to life in the Dream, Plan, Build video series.
I set the layout at night because it makes all the lights stand out inside the buildings and on the trains. To me, it adds a lot of character to be able to see inside the buildings, and just adds a lot of nighttime grandeur to it. To achieve a dusk look, the easiest way is to just use blue lighting for the room. There's no white lights in this room, just blue. And then, of course, the white lights are all the little lights on the layout and on the trains. Having it set at night does several things. It's sort of like a movie stage where the illumination is all coming from the layout, so it draws you into the scene. But you also have to overpaint the characters as you do with makeup on a movie set. If you look at the things up close with natural lighting, they look over-weathered. But in blue lighting, they tend to look really great.
David Nicastro has spent more than 10 years making sure this small layout in his Houston home looks, sounds, and feels real. Mission accomplished. It's an HO layout built to run through the darkness of night and right through your imagination. Measuring only 5 by 8 feet, this depiction of an industrial port city is set in the 1960s. The trains roll past the Schwinn Bicycle Factory, where children's dreams are assembled one by one. The waterfront is a hustling, bustling place where the fresh catch of the day must be moved quickly before the fishermen arrive again at dawn. It's the realism that pulls you in. It's fantasy based on reality.
Industrial ports, again, add character. This is a visual hobby, and there's a lot more to see in an industrial area than out in a field to me. Yeah, I traveled throughout the country on business, and wherever I go, I take my camera, and I take pictures of interesting scenes, and then I build models of them.
The entire layout is at eye level, the same way you look at life that goes on around you. Nothing is modeled unless it's visible from the front. But if you just keep staring, you see more and more. You hear more and more. Even in the dim light of night, the details are evident.
I built the layout up high because, for me, it adds realism. I don't like to look down on the roofs of my trains and buildings. I like to look at eye level inside the buildings and at the wheels of the train, which is the way we interact with them in the real world. But I don't think that's for everybody necessarily.
Nicastro also designs and builds layouts for other people, and having his own business has allowed him to design countless captivating scenes, both indoors and out.
From a layout point of view, they came in and took over, and we gave them the parameters of how much money we wanted to spend, and they designed this lovely horseshoe area or a dog bone design, and they put in the waterfall for us, and it came out a lot more impressive than I imagined it would be, and it's been fun having it in the backyard.
Yeah, I think that space limitations have been a barrier for many people entering the hobby, and I think that's unfortunate because everybody, no matter how much money they have, is constrained by space and time. And to me, there's a way to build a model railroad to suit everybody, no matter what their space limitations. This layout is really just 4 by 8 feet, plus the waterfront, which is projected out in front of the layout for another foot. And then I use mirrors to make it seem larger, and then lighting effects.
A busy industrial port packed into 40 square feet. Proof positive that good things really do come in small packages.
Early on in planning your layout, you're going to have to make a decision on lighting. There's really two choices that you have, fluorescent lighting and incandescent lighting. The advantages of fluorescent lighting are that they generate very little heat, they evenly light an area, and oftentimes they exist in a family room or room that you're building your layout in. Track lighting, like you see in my basement, needs to be planned ahead of time, generates a lot of heat, and takes a lot of amperage. You'll have to decide to cut it into multiple circuits, otherwise you'll probably blow some fuses. It does have the advantage of being able to spotlight a scene. However, be careful that your lights are all coming from the same direction, or you're going to have multiple sun angles. For those modelers with a double deck layout, the problem's always been lighting the bottom deck. Rope lights are the solution. These can be adhered to the bottom of the upper deck and evenly light the lower deck. For nighttime railroad scenes, modelers have used two different types of lights. Black lights, which have a purple glow, but have the advantage of being able to use day glow paints for windows, automobile headlights and taillights, and blue lights like I use here. Blue lights give a nighttime appearance, yet allow enough light so you can see the trains and some of the details. Nighttime operation can be a lot of fun. A couple of tips. For walk-around throttles, make sure that the plug-ins are easily findable, as with turnout throws. And if you're running a yard at night, take a tip from the real railroads and put up a couple of floodlights. In addition to locomotive headlights, structures and signals add a lot of dynamics to nighttime operation. Here's another tip: wire your structures in a zone. It'll be easier for troubleshooting. Something else to consider: if you run your bulbs at less than 12 volts, they'll last a lot longer and they'll look more realistic. Sometimes lights can be so bright that they'll shine right through the plastic. You can line it with tape where it shines through, or better yet, when assembling the building, paint the inside with dark opaque paint. Backdrops are one of the key things you can do to a model railroad. It adds realism and depth and dimension, and also sets it in its place in time, along with the structures and rolling stock and vehicles. I'm going to be showing you and sharing with you some tips and techniques today on a technique that I use for blending blue and white together. Once your backdrop is created and primed and ready for paint, first step is buying the paint. There's a lot of different blues. A lot of people will take some chips from the store and go outside and try to match it to the sky. I've done the same thing, however, I'm going to recommend that we go one shade darker of blue. The reason for that is that we'll be blending white with the blue. It'll lighten the sky, and also the blue will photograph better, videotape better, and actually makes a better backdrop for the trains. What you're doing is you're setting a theatrical set and letting the trains be the actors through that set. The next step is to buy the paint. Latex paint, the cheapest paint you can buy. It needs to be flat. It doesn't have to be durable paint. It won't be scrubbed. It won't be marked with crayons by your kids and have to clean it all up. You just want to find the paint that's the right color and make sure it's flat. You want any reflections, because with all the lighting that's on a model railroad, you do not want reflections coming off your backdrop. We're going to start with the blue. There we go. Loading up the roller here, some blue. Move this out of my way. The backdrop preparation is key. This is masonite. Now there's a number of different materials that people have used. Masonite is inexpensive, it bends easily around corners, and it's perfectly flat, which makes it a real nice backdrop. Some people prefer styrene. The reason for that being is that styrene doesn't shrink. Masonite, in weather changes, humidity changes, if your room has any change in temperature and humidity throughout the year, it does form cracks, and there's really not too much you can do about it. Unlike drywall that you can tape seams, masonite doesn't have a beveled edge, but normally the cracks are not very visible. What I'm doing here is trying to get a nice even coat of blue. The key for this technique is to get a lot of paint on. We'll be painting the white while the blue is still wet, so we don't want the blue to dry too rapidly. Just get a nice even coat. Make sure you don't get ridges. It's just like painting your living room. I'm using a small roller because the backdrop I'm painting here is only 4 feet long. Certainly in a bigger room, you'd want to use a bigger roller just to cover more space. What's nice about this technique is once you get the blue down, if you do too much and you can't complete it, it doesn't hurt to have the blue as a backdrop. The white is, you can always give it a second coat of blue and work your blending and your clouds in. So there we go, that looks pretty good. Just smoothing out the last little bit here. Once your blue is up, we're going to pour some white and work with the white. This can be any white. This happens to be ceiling white, which is nice and bright, and that seems to work pretty well. Now I will be applying this with the brush rather than a roller. I'm going to load up my brush good with white, and I'm going to start at the bottom and actually work towards the top. Now you're going to note that your brush is going to get filled with blue paint because the blue is still wet. That's all right. That's part of the technique. As I move up, the white and blue blend together. Move this out of the way. Now depending on how high your backdrop is, you can blend quite a ways up. This is a 2 by 4 foot backdrop, and I'm going to go about halfway up. Now I'm going to add the clouds. There's a lot of different ways to add clouds to the sky. Some modelers will choose a stencil and spray paint white. I've always found those a little hard-edged, and this is a way to blend it in, which I feel subtler and more realistic. The blue is still wet. We've blended it. I'm going to start by stippling. Stippling is the technique where I'm actually using the tip of the brush and applying it instead of painting with the bristles of a brush. And I'm going to get some white on there, and then I'm going to spread it out a little bit. How big to make your clouds? Clouds are quite large in the sky. Sometimes they fill the whole sky, sometimes they're quite small. So you've got a lot of leeway and a lot of latitude here. You'll note that I'm starting at the top of the clouds and kind of blending them in on the bottom. The top of the cloud then has the contrast against the blue sky, and on the bottom it blends in. And I find that's a very realistic technique. You can make clouds, some depth to your clouds by making the clouds that are actually closer to you, if you will, use more white and actually make them a little bit larger. I'm going to make the cloud that I'm painting right now in front of the cloud I previously painted. Again, I'm stippling. Clouds don't have the hard edges. And then I can use the brush and blend it a little bit in the inside of the cloud. Now the thing that'll really make these clouds realistic, once I get to this point, is when I come back into the clouds I've already painted and I add some highlights inside. So there's some clouds in front of clouds. You're going to reach a point where the blue starts to dry and the technique doesn't work as well anymore. At that point, just stop. You can always repaint the blue, pick up where you left off, and blend the two scenes together. That's not a problem. It's actually quite easy to do. This wet on wet technique is a great way to get realistic skies. I hope you'll try it on your layout.
For as long as anyone here can remember, the Nebraska scenery has always included blue skies, warm fields, and the trains of the Union Pacific. They come here bound for the Union Pacific's Bailey Yard. It is the equivalent of the IBM or the General Motors of the railroad world. It is where the Union Pacific puts together trains bound for all points east and west. Spread out over more than 2,800 acres in western Nebraska, there's enough room for nearly 3,000 football fields. The numbers are staggering.
The North Platte Yard is the largest railroad classification yard in the entire world. We have here a total of 260 miles of track spreading over an 8-mile area. Here every day we pass through 10,000 cars. Of those, 3,000 of them are sorted so that they are built up into different trains to go to their destinations, which are on the east and the west coast. North Platte is so large we have almost 2,500 employees here. It is the biggest yard, not only in Union Pacific, but in the United States and the world. It's in the Guinness Book of Records. And through here pass all of the goods that Americans use every day. If it's a refrigerator, or if it's a car, or if it's the cornflakes that you eat in the morning, whatever it may be, you can count on it going through North Platte. It's a place that is a barometer of the whole economy of the United States.
The Union Pacific was born here back in 1866 because North Platte, Nebraska was geographically blessed. It was the midpoint between Chicago and Salt Lake City, and halfway between Omaha and Denver. It was the logical place for a railroad to call home. So the biggest freight railroad built the biggest freight yard. Buffalo Bill Cody lived just north of the yard, and at the turn of the century transported his Wild West show by covered wagon and by rail car. For years, North Platte was best known for the canteens which served the troops on trains passing through during the World Wars. Today, North Platte is one of the last great railroad towns. Union Pacific and North Platte are truly synonymous terms. They are inseparable. This is home to nearly 2,500 workers and their families, and another 1,500 Union Pacific retirees. The company hands out checks totaling nearly $100 million every year. As I said, the numbers are staggering. Even more mind-boggling is how incredibly organized everything is. When the trains come in, they might roll into one of two classification yards, where the cars are sorted and built link by link into new trains bound for new destinations.
Let's say that we have a train coming from the west going east, say it's going to Kansas City. But this train also has on it some cars that are destined for Chicago and some that are destined for New York. We need to separate those cars out. So we have what we call a classification yard within the overall North Platte yard.
Is Toyota Foreman Lay coming over?
This Foreman Lay, go ahead.
About how much longer before you want to move that tamper and regulator back towards the east hump over?
This is the westbound hump classification tower in North Platte, Nebraska. And we get the traffic trains that come in from Chicago, North Little Rock, St. Louis, all different locations east. And we pull these trains back onto what we call a pullback track and push them up over this hump and classify them for outbounds to go west from here. We push them up, and there's a fellow called a pin puller that actually separates the cars out here. And we have 50 classification tracks in our bowl here. They're all assigned to different locations at Denver, LA, Salt Lake, wherever they may be going. And as soon as the pin puller pulls that pin and the car starts rolling, why, the hump computer takes over, lines the switches, retards the cars for speed, and puts them into the track they need to go into. The retarders are a mechanical means, kind of like brakes on a car, that when the box car gets into the retarders, the computer clamps up on the wheels, and that's what varies the speed of the car rolling off the hump. They roll on down to a hook on the other cars that are in there, and then as we get a complete train classified, we'll take them out and build them in our departure yard for an outbound train.
Besides sorting trains, Bailey also handles what are called unit trains, which usually carry just one commodity, like grain or coal, to one customer. Unit trains now make up about 75% of the business here. Service and maintenance are of the utmost importance at Bailey Yard.
Our one-stop service centers here in North Platte, we have one for the westbound traffic and one for the eastbound traffic. And it's like going to your local gas station, getting your car gassed up, maybe getting your oil changed. With a locomotive, you also put sand on it because you use that for dripping of the wheels. They check them over, they clean the windshields, and they're on their way. And a lot of this can be done in less than an hour, whereas in the old days it would take sometimes anywhere from 12 to 24 hours to do it. And every month, those diesels are filled up with 14 million gallons of diesel fuel. Union Pacific Railroad is the largest user of diesel fuel of any company in the United States. Here at the North Platte Car Repair Shop, we handle about 50 cars a day that we can actually do repairs on. We handle about 10,000 wheels that we change out from the cars every year. It's a very busy place, and we do a lot of brake shoe repairs. We put on new brake shoes. We do repairs on the cars if they've been dented or damaged in some way, do welding, other kinds of light repairs.
Bailey Yard. It is hard manual labor, and it is high-tech. It is massive, yet organized, a mixture of the old and the new. Bailey Yard, the organization center for one of the greatest railroads in the world.
It's the fictional Franklin and South Manchester Railroad. It runs through the make-believe towns of Doverton and Manchester. But it's so real, it pulls you in. It takes you back to 1935, when New England, like the rest of the country, had been beaten down by the Great Depression. It's old and tired and tough. You'd expect a young Marlon Brando to step out from behind the shadows. It's been in the making for more than 12 years now. And believe it or not, it's the first layout George Selios has ever built.
I'm surprised that the layout came out so well because I never really built a layout before. This is my very first, and I'm really pleased the way it came out. What's unusual about the layout is that no planning went into it. I just sit down and just go for it, just do it. Maybe I'll make a little rough sketch before I start that certain area, and then I'll just do it. And I've been blessed with that ability to, without any planning involved. I've had visitors from all over the world come see this layout. They've come from Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Germany, and so many other countries that just can't name them all.
At 23 by 42 feet, it's one of the largest private layouts in the country. And it's located in the Massachusetts town, where George also runs a small mail-order business, building fine-scale, very detailed miniatures for the model railroad enthusiast. As you can probably tell from his own personal layout, what George builds is first-class stuff.
I only work on it about 3 months out of the year because the remaining 9 months I have to make my living doing fine-scale miniature kits. I started building this layout in April of 1985, and I spent about 8 to 10 hours a day working on it. And it's pretty hard to get me out of here because I really enjoy working on it.
What impresses you most about this cityscape is the incredible attention to detail. If it was life-sized, it would be the most realistic Hollywood set you'd ever seen. Some of the buildings are scratch-built, some are kits. Everything seems to be weathered and aged.
Well, I guess it's my nature that everything looks so real. It's the only way I know how to model. It's sort of like an artist who does his painting. He just can't say that's good enough. I have to make it look the best I can, and that's just part of me. All the buildings in the layout are weathered with a mixture of alcohol and ink, and then I use other techniques of powdered pastel chalks and dry brushing, and whatever I have on hand, that's what'll work for me. Some of my techniques are very unusual, but they work well. The river is made with Envirotex, a two-part epoxy. And the reason I had to put 8 layers in it is because I couldn't get the right color, and I just kept doing it over and over. And on the 7th layer, I thought I had it right. I called my wife down here, and she says, "Nope, that's just too blue." So I added 1 more layer of a light coating of black, and that just did it, and that was it. So it came out perfect for me. The rocks on my mountains are made of plaster of Paris. They are made from actual real rock. I make a rubber mold of it using latex rubber. I brush it on and let it harden, and then I just pour the plaster into the rubber mold. So these are actually from real rocks. And they are colored with acrylic paints and various other stains of alcohol and ink. And then grass and dirt and trees and everything else is put on top.
It's a freestanding walk-around layout with 3 distinct peninsulas and floor-to-ceiling scenery. There are hundreds of buildings with thousands of windows. The buildings, the bridges, the river, they're feats of engineering excellence which show the painstaking attention to detail that characterizes every angle of this creation. Still to come, now under construction, another city which will be called Franklin. You can be sure it'll be as gritty and urban as its neighbors. All of this from someone who fell in love with trains when he was a little boy. His dreams and his art blend in perfect harmony to give us a scene so realistic that it seems hauntingly familiar.
When I first started the layout, I had no idea it was going to evolve into this. I wanted a layout for a long, long time, and when I saw I was getting older, I said I better go ahead and start it, and I started it, like I said, in 1985, and it really evolved into something that's really far beyond my expectations.
I'm using artist acrylic gloss medium, in this case from Polyterrain, to create water effect on this small lake. Gloss medium is an excellent material to use if you want to create wave and ripple effects in the water surface. We've painted the lake surface black, and we've added some tan color around the shore. Start by painting in small patches of the gloss medium. It's important to keep these areas fairly thin and to work slowly so that you don't introduce air bubbles into the gloss medium. Use a wide flat paintbrush to smooth the gloss medium out over the surface. Use the brush to stipple wave effects into the gloss medium. Be sure to work the material up into the shore. Here I'm trying to work it up into the rocks where waves would be hitting the shore. It will take the gloss medium about a day to dry, and when it does, you will have a nice, smooth, shiny, rippled lake surface.
The Wildwood Scenic Line still exists and is now part of the Grand Delusion mainline passenger service into the mountainous region.
Marcel Troutwine has always been interested in trains. This layout's been a work in progress since 1978.
Well, when I first bought the house, I saw this empty basement, and I already had in the back of my mind that I wanted to build a model railroad. I built other layouts before, but they were a lot smaller than this. This one here is actually permanent, built into the house. If I ever move, I cannot take this with me because it has a cycloramic backdrop, floor-to-ceiling scenery. The cycloramic means it's curved both ways. It's curved from the ceiling down to the wall, down to the floor, and then it's curved also in the corners, so it's like a concave effect as you're looking into the corners. As you see, there's no lines. I wanted to give it the illusion of depth. I've actually had this railroad concept in mind for a long time, and have thought about how I was going to build it. And I wanted to make it look more, design it for taking photographs to give it that illusion of distance more than a shelf railroad. That's why it's designed the way it is. The village of Little Switzerland is catering to over 300 visitors a day at any given time.
He was born in Switzerland. He says that inspired this wonderful layout.
I had something about narrow gauge and small mining trains, and there's a lot of that over in Europe. So that reflects in my layout. As you can see, there's a lot of unusual things on the layout with small-scale trains and mining operations, and it kind of brings back my childhood days. One of the popular stops along the way is Von Strauss Castle, which was built in 1893 by his great-great-granddad after he struck it rich in the mines when he found gold.
And this, all of this, is from his imagination. But when you hear him tell the story, you almost feel like you know the people who live here in Little Switzerland and Bridgeport.
This is the highest point a tourist can go, and the view is absolutely breathtaking.
In the mountains, weather is always a worry. Same thing in his layout.
So the lights start dimming down, and then all of a sudden the lightning starts to flash, and then there's thunder in the background, and then you hear the rain. And basically you have a thunderstorm in the mountains.
For Marcel, a lot of the fun of building a layout comes from experimentation and trial and error, and ultimately success. He says people just getting started should try to do their best on their own, but if they just can't figure it out, or if they just plain don't have time, he can help.